Hello, class, and welcome to this week's lecture. Now, what we're going to be talking about is intentional torts, okay? Torts are crimes against people or against society in general. Now, they are civil penalties. So, the little bit of difference, just as we begin, is sometimes a tort and a crime are the same. Okay, an example would be battery. We're going to talk about it here shortly. So some torts are crimes. However, there are certain torts or certain crimes that aren't torts. Like for instance, DUI, driving under the influence. Okay, that is a crime. It's not a tort because you didn't hurt anyone else. Okay, now say you were in a DUI car accident and someone is injured or their property is injured, then you have a tort, okay? Because some person was injured. But if you're just DUI by yourself and you get pulled over, you've committed a crime, but you have not committed a tort, okay? So that's kind of the way I'll explain it in regards to that. And as we go through, we'll have a lot of examples that we can kind of discuss. Now, intentional torts, okay? The first thing off of it is we got to kind of define it. So we'll look at the actual name. It's intentional. So it requires intent, okay? That means that you had to want to do it or intend to do it. So it's intentional, okay? So for instance, I'll give you an example. So a tort of battery, okay? We're going to get to battery as we go through the lesson, but the tort of battery is an unwanted touching. So for instance, a punch, okay? So if I walk up to you and I just punch you right in the face, okay? Because I'm mad at you because you whistled at my girlfriend, okay? That's battery. I intentionally punched you in the face. That's a tort. Flip it is I am walking through a crowd and I am a little scared because I just left the movie theater in which I watched the latest Saw movie. And upon watching this movie, I am a little freaked out. I'm a little scared. I should have never watched it anyways, but I'm just walking out to the movie theater and someone taps me on the shoulder to get my attention because I, have, something on the back of my pants or something, so he's gonna let me know, hey, listen, or hey, you dropped $1 back there, whatever it is. So he taps me on the shoulder and I'm just freaked out. And I just turn around and sock the guy. Okay, that's probably not a tort because I didn't intend to it was a reaction. There was no intent. There was never a moment of intent. I was scared. I just came out of a scary movie. Someone tapped me on the shoulder and I just whacked around and hit him. It's probably not a tort. Because it has to be a act in which you had control over what was going on. So, it has to be a voluntary volitional act. And sometimes, a natural reaction when we're scared to someone touching us would be to, defend ourselves. So that's kind of the difference, okay? So as we go through it, we got to make sure that we understand that it is that intentional, okay, so it has to be volitional, but just being reckless isn't enough for it to be a tort. I had an intent. So if I am, running through a hallway after somebody that whistled at my girlfriend, and I finally catch up to him, and he's walking away, and I finally catch up to him, and I just boom right into the back of him, and he falls onto the ground. That's battery. Okay, I intentionally hit him. But recklessness, say I'm just running through because I'm a wild, crazy kid, woo, and I'm just running through the crowd, and I slam into the guy. That's probably not a tort. See, recklessness isn't enough because I didn't intend to hit him in the back and make him go flipping over like I did when he whistled at my girlfriend. This one, I'm just running and being stupid. I'm being reckless. That's not enough, okay? And then I guess the final little thing about intent is what's called the doctrine of transferred intent. I would know this. it's commonly tested, is say I want to punch the guy who whistled at my girlfriend. So I go to punch him, and he ducks, and I hit the person behind him, okay? Have I committed battery? Because it's an intentional tort. So I didn't intend to hit the guy behind him. I intended to hit the guy that whistled at my girlfriend. So I swung, I missed, and I hit the other guy. That's transferred intent. So if I intend to commit a tort against one person, it can transfer to the person who actually got injured. So yes, that would be a tort. And we're going to talk about them as well as far as intent goes. If I intend to commit one tort and another tort actually happens, that's enough. Okay, that's transferred intent. So an example would be assault is different than battery in the sense that we're going to obviously get to them, but assault is putting someone in apprehension of harm. It would be like I am not trying to hit you, I'm just flinching at you, right? That's all I'm doing. Or I'm putting or I'm just going like that. I'm not actually going to punch, I'm just kind of faking out, hey, kid messed me up, boom, right in the face, right? That's assault. I'm putting them in apprehension of harm, okay? But say I go to flinch at them, I don't mean to hit them, and it was a little closer than I thought, and I actually hit him in the face. That is a tort, even though I didn't intend to hit him, because I was intending to commit assault. Transferred intent doctrine says, hey, that's battery. Okay, so it's all about intent. So that's kind of what we need to know about intent. Just to clear it all up, you got to have intent. Okay, and there's this transferred intent doctrine. Being reckless isn't enough. Okay, so let's talk about some of the actual torts, and these are tested. These are the intentional torts. The first one we're talking about is battery. Okay. Now, when we talk about battery, we're going to break it into elements and try and, instead of learning these long definitions, get the elements down. So what are the requirements for battery? Is first, you got to intend. It's all about intent, okay, and intentional torts. So I want to intend to cause a harmful or offensive touching, okay? And when I do that touching, the other person is harmed. So, battery can be a lot of things. Like we think about it as I intend to punch you in the face, and I do. Well, that's battery, and you're injured, and it's intent and battery. But sometimes battery can be much simpler than that. It can be offensive, or it can just be just a touching in which the other person did not consent to. So, I'll give you a great example. You're back in middle school, okay? And there's a kid in the hallway, and you decide that you think it would be funny to come up from behind him and flick him in the ear. Not going to really hurt him. You're just going to boop, flick him in the ear. That's battery, okay? It's harmful or offensive touching. He didn't want you flicking him in the ear. So at that point, you've committed a battery. Now, the thing about battery is words aren't enough, okay? So if I say to you, I'm going to punch you in the face, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and you're like, oh my God, I'm scared, he's going to do that. That's not battery. Battery requires a touching. So for instance, say I throw a punch at you because you whistled at my girlfriend, and I miss. Like I intended to hit you right in the nose, and I swung and completely missed. I didn't commit battery. Battery requires a harmful or offensive touching. I never touched you. I may have meant to. So I filled the intent requirement, but the second requirement is that it's, an actual touching. So that's battery. The next intentional tort we want to talk about is assault. Assault goes along with battery a lot. It's the intent to cause a reasonable apprehension of an imminent battery, okay? So that's why you always hear assault and battery going together. So say you whistled at my girlfriend, and I went to throw a punch at you because I'm going to batter you. And while my fist is in the air, I'm committing assault because in that split moment of a second, it only takes that nanosecond that I see you throwing the punch. I'm like, I'm about to get hit. And then bam, you've assaulted me. because I was in imminent fear of the battery, and you also committed battery because you actually hit me. So say the hypo just before, where I want to hit you in the face and I miss. I did not commit battery because there was no touching, but I did commit assault. So there was a tort because you missed. I was in apprehension of you of hitting me, and that's assault. So, but battery and assault don't always go together. You don't always have assault with battery. For instance, we had a hypo earlier talking about battery where a guy whistles at my girlfriend, and I run down the hallway, and he's walking away, back turn, and I just slam right into the back of him. There was no assault. He never saw it coming. You have to have a millisecond is all you need, but you got to have a millisecond of fear of that imminent battery. And he never knew it was coming till he was actually battered. So battery was there, but not assault. So that's kind of where assault is. So they're very similar. In the way that I remember the difference between them is battery is the one where there's an actual touching, and assault is the one where there isn't. So I always said, hey, if you hit him with a bat, it's battery. That's just how I got it in my head. Was I was thinking a baseball bat and hitting someone with a bat and battery. So that's just kind of how I got the difference between the two. All right, the next one is false imprisonment. So the next intentional tort is false imprisonment. This happens a lot in our business worlds, because there's going to be this whole discussion about shoplifters and things like that. But just in general, false imprisonment. Let's start there. So the defendant, the person who's imprisoning someone, the elements are they confine a plaintiff in an area. The plaintiff knows that they're confined in an area and they can't leave. Okay? So let's break that out, because false imprisonment is a very interesting concept. So say, for instance, I go to a bar, and a restaurant bar, and someone is there, and they are leaving the bar. They get into their car, and they go ahead and get into the passenger side, and they are going to sleep off their drunkenness. And I get in the car, and they're drunk. I get in the car, and I take off with them. Okay? And they're like, stop, what are you doing? Wait, let me go. And I lock the car doors, okay? And they're in the back seat sleeping it off, so it has that child lock thing, where you can't open them from the inside, okay? If they're locked. And they can't escape, and I'm driving down the road at 70 miles an hour, and they can roll down the window and jump out, they die. That's false imprisonment, okay? It's actually not kidnapping. Kidnapping is a crime, not a tort. Okay, so the tort aspect of it is false imprisonment. So I have you and you can't escape. Okay, let's just flip it a little bit to show you the differences. To say the same scenario: someone's in a restaurant bar, they walk out, they go to their car, they're going to sleep it off. They get in the back seat, they pass out. I get into the car, and I take them. And I'm driving down the highway 70 miles an hour and taking them to my lair. That's not false imprisonment. And you're like, what do you mean? They had no idea that they're imprisoned. It requires the plaintiff to know that they're in a confined area and that there's no chance of escape. So you're like, wow, that's pretty creepy. And it's other things. There's all kinds of crimes there. But no torts have been committed, because the person doesn't realize that they've been injured, okay? The person doesn't realize they've been injured, so there's no torts. And if you can, and just to flip it all over, if you can reasonably escape, you're not falsely imprisoned, okay? So say, for instance, I get them, so they wake up in my lair, okay? Now they're awake. They're in my lair. It's a confined space. And now we have false imprisonment. However, there's a window right there, and I'm not around. I've just dropped them off my lair. I'm off to get another person. There's a door. Well, you can just walk out. There's nothing keeping you from walking out. You're not falsely imprisoned. You never were. You, from the time that you knew that you were in a confined space, you had a chance to escape. No false imprisonment. All kinds of crimes, but no false imprisonment. So that's kind of how it works. So next one is intentional infliction of emotional distress. Okay. Obviously, you intended to provide emotional distress. The defendant's acts are outrageous, and the plaintiff actually suffers emotional distress. Now, here's the whole thing that we got to know about this: is intentional infliction of emotional stress requires outrageous conduct. It has to be outrageous. So I'll give you an example. That was actually on my bar exam. So, I mean, I don't remember the exact facts, but it went something like this. Guy comes up to a door, and his neighbor's door, and he knocks on it, knock, 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 and he says to his neighbor something about his yard being full of trash, and he's a hillbilly, and he's destroying property values, and he's a worthless piece of crap, and he's just like, look at all this junk, you're a slob. And he's just saying this to him, okay? And he's trying to get this guy into emotional distress. What business is it of his that this guy has, a refrigerator in his front yard? It was something ridiculous. It was like a washer, dryers, and refrigerators, all kinds of appliances. And anyways, okay, well, that's not IIED, or intentional infliction of emotional stress, because it's not really outrageous. And he just walked over there and told him you're a hillbilly. I mean, I don't know. It doesn't rise to that level. So what would have rose to that level? This is what would have rose to that level. Say the guy, instead of knocking on the door, he puts a huge sign in his yard pointing to his neighbor's house saying, look at the hillbilly in the junkyard I have to live by. That's outrageous. Or he knocks on his door, and instead of talking to him and telling him that, he starts screaming at the top of his lungs to the whole neighborhood, this is the hillbilly. Look at these washers and dryers. He's a piece of crap. Don't you agree with me? And he's just yelling and doing all kinds of outrageous behavior. That's what it takes to get to intentional infliction of emotional stress. It's got to be outrageous. Now, the third element, though, was the guy has to suffer emotional distress. See, there always has to be a damage inside of these cases. That's like the false imprisonment didn't feel right when we were talking about how you got to know, yeah, you're not damaged yet, so you got to have damages inside of this. So he has to actually be emotionally stressed. So if you knocked on my door and say I was the neighbor and I have washers and dryers and I don't know, tires and cars on blocks and all this crap in my yard, and you go out and you're like, you redneck, and I'm like, yeah, I am. I'm not offended by that at all. Why didn't it get any emotional distress then? So I have to actually be distressed in order for the tort to kick in, okay? So you got to remember that. There's always got to be damages. And next one we're going to talk about is trespass to land, okay? So the elements are, you go onto the land of another, you weren't authorized to do it, and I mean, that's basically the, you intended to do it and you do it. I mean, you entered the land of another with the intent to do it. So, say I decide I see this field, and and it's real open, and it's a little muddy, and I'm gonna go do some donuts in this big field in my car. So I drive it over there, I do some donuts, and I pull out. Well, that's trespass to land, okay? I intentionally went onto the land of another, and I wasn't authorized. However, say for instance, I'm in a car accident, and my car flips over into the land of another. Well, that's not trespass to land, because I didn't have the intent to go onto the land of another. Okay? There was no intent there. We got to remember these are intentional torts. When you get to the exam, and if there's ever a question about it, it'll always go to the intent element. That's the first thing you always look at. And if you don't have that, you don't have the tort. And you can stop right there. You don't have to go into whether it was authorized and think. You don't have intent, you don't have an intentional tort. Always look at that first. Next one we're talking about is trespass to chattel. That's the intent to intermeddle with the personal property of another. So you got to deprive them of it. So for instance, I'll give you an example is trespass to chattel would be I decide to go over and take your pen off your desk. We work together, same office. I take the pen from your desk and I bring it over to my desk and I sign a check with it because I didn't have a pen. And then I take the pen back to your desk and I put it into your cup. That is a tort. That is trespass to chattel. I intended to take your pen away without permission and you did not have the ability to use the pen. I impaired the quality of it. You're like, well, how'd you impair the quality of it? Because I wrote with it. I used ink. But it's just that little, it doesn't matter. Any impairment of it is enough. That's trespass to chattel. Even though I gave it back. Okay? Even though I gave it back. Which brings us to our next intentional tort, which is conversion. Very similar to trespass to chattel. Except for this is a heightened level. That was just this little taking of a pen. Conversion is where I go take the pen and I keep the dumb thing. And I don't give it back. Or I break the pen. Or I use all the ink in the pen. I write my memoirs with your pen and then give it back to you. Or I keep it for a week and then give it back. I mean, it's the heightened level. You'll know the difference. Trespass to chattel is I took it, I borrowed, I wrote a check. Conversions, I took it and I wrote my memoirs and used all the ink out of it, or I intended to never give it back to you, or I broke it, even if it was accidental. So I intended to take it, so that's the intent, but I accidentally broke it. Well, that's conversion, because I've seriously interfered with the plaintiff's right to control the pen, use the pen, and that's conversion. So those are our intentional torts. So I'm going to kind of just list them off for us. There's battery. Okay, I'm going to list them off and go give a very brief explanation of what you would probably see on an exam. There is battery. That's the intention for harmful touching. Assault is putting someone in reasonable apprehension of a battery. False imprisonment is confining a plaintiff who knows that they're being confined to a bounded area. Intentional infliction of emotional stress. That's the intent to cause this emotional stress, and I use outrageous behavior, and there's emotional stress occurs. Remember that word outrageous. It comes up in a lot of exams. Trespass to land is I intend to go on the land of another without authorization. Trespass to chattel is a very simple use of someone else's property. Okay? Conversion would be seriously interfering with the use of someone else's property. Okay. So that's kind of the actual torts. Now we need to talk about the defenses to torts. So if you're accused of a tort, what are the common defenses to them? And there's not many, but we'll kind of go over them. One is consent. Okay, so I said to you, punch me in the face. And you punch me. Well, yes, the guy intended to punch me, but remember the second part of battery is that the act, the whatever it is, the punch causes a harmful or offensive or unwanted touching. Well, I wanted it, so I told you to do it. I can't tell you, hey, punch me in the face. I punch the face, now I want to sue you. You can't do that. So consent would be the by far the biggest defense that you commonly see. Another one is self-defense. So, you take a swing at me, you put me in apprehension of immediate battery, you miss, and then I attack you and I punch you. Okay? Well, that's self-defense. I mean, you can't accuse me of battery in a self-defense mode. However, here's the thing, is it has to be reasonable. Okay? Self-defense must be reasonable. So if you attempt to, I'm going to use a kind of a different hypo. is if you were the flick the ear hypo. Okay, remember earlier, you're in high school, middle school, and you walk up to somebody and flick them in the back of the head or flick them in the back of the ear. That's battery. Okay? If I turn around with a bazooka and, shoot you, that's not self-defense. That's not reasonable force. Okay? It's not reasonable force at all. So that's kind of where we're at. Is it's got to be reasonable. So the reaction has to fit kind of the crime. So now to use our regular battery one, because this can be kind of a hot topic issue and it can get really political. So I stay out of that kind of nonsense. But so someone goes to punch you and they miss, and you pull out a gun and shoot them. That is probably battery, because unless you were in fear of dying and you couldn't retreat, okay, there was nowhere for you to go, then that's the whole stand your ground laws and things like that. But what it comes down to is that your reaction to self-defense must fit the amount of force or fear of force that's coming towards you. So keep that in mind. That's how self-defense works. Defense of others is another type of defense. So someone else is getting beat up and you intervene, okay? And you can use the amount of force that party that's on the ground or standing up, doesn't matter, you would have used as self-defense to defend them. Next one's defense of property. Here's the thing. You can't use a lot of force to defend property, but you can use some. Okay, reasonable. Once again, it has to be reasonable. So there's some kids, not kids, let's not use children, but there are some college kids that I have a farm, and they're out on my farm and they're drinking beer and smoking weed and just, having a little party. There's 10 of them. I can't go out there with a machine gun and start shooting people. I can't do that. Not allowed. You can't defend your property by killing other people, okay? But I can call the police. I can go out there and ask them to leave. I can do all kinds of things like that. I can put up fencing. I can do other stuff to defend my property, but it has to be reasonable, because all they're doing is, drinking a beer, standing there. So I got to be reasonable in my reaction. So now you may have a different response if someone is pouring gasoline on your house and is lighting a match and your children are inside. Well, now you're defending human life, but there's no children inside. You can probably take way more action to tackle the guy, okay, to defend your property, okay? Now, lethal force, normally never in defense of property, but tackle the guy, sure, okay? Punch him, sure. Things like that, absolutely. And the final one that we're going to kind of discuss is necessity, okay? So a defendant may commit an intentional tort if they reasonably believe that it was necessary to prevent further injury. And it's almost like, I'll give you an example. I'm going down the road. There is a child in the road. Okay, he's ridden his bike out into the road, and I see the open field to my right. And my choices are kill kid or trespass on his land with my car. And I trespass on his land. That's not a tort. You have the defense of necessity. Whether it was, fear of you getting injured, or the child getting injured, the public getting injured at large, that's not a tort, okay? So you always have that defense is necessity as well. So that is our basic discussion on intentional torts. They are highly tested, and they happen a lot inside of the entire business world and in personal world. A lot of our examples were personal related just because they're simpler and easier to get the point across, but they happen very commonly in business, especially with our employees. It is actually very, very, very common, and we wouldn't think it is, but a lot of times our employees commit torts against guests or invitees to our businesses, and we got to make sure that we educate them on the proper way to handle ourselves inside of these different style of cases. So that's it for this week, and I will see you with our next lecture. Have a blessed day.